Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening's event at Japan House, London, Windows on Contemporary Japanese Architecture, Photography Talk with Jérémie Souteyrat. My name is Simon Wright. I am the Director of Programming at Japan House, London. And today we are broadcasting live from Japan House in front of both a live physical audience here in this hall and a live virtual audience on Zoom, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. So welcome to everybody who is joining online. Tonight's event takes a look at the types of houses and windows that Japan's architects are designing today through the work of French photographer Jérémie Souteyrat. For tonight's event, we are delighted to be joined in person by Jérémie himself to hear more about his photography, projects capturing images of contemporary Japanese houses, some of which are currently on display in the Japan House London exhibition, Windowology, New Architectural Views from Japan. Please join me in welcoming Jérémie. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jérémie. I mean, this is actually not the first time we've met. By quite coincidence, we've worked with Jérémie before at Japan House London, and so we were quite surprised when we saw in the proposal in the exhibition that he was actually chosen in Japan to portray Japanese contemporary architecture for this exhibition. So a great privilege. Thank you very much indeed. So Jérémie Souteyrat is a French photographer and videographer who emphasizes the human figure in various types of images he produces, from portraits to architecture. He began his professional career in Japan, where he started to receive assignments from some of the most prestigious newspapers and magazines in the world, including the New York Times, The Guardian, Le Monde, Elle, and Der Spiegel. His corporate clients include luxury brands, architects, and galleries. In 2014, he published his first monograph, Tokyo no Ie, a book capturing contemporary houses in Tokyo within the neighborhoods in which they were built. He moved to London in 2018 after 9 years spent in Tokyo. Thank you very much, Jérémie. So during this event, Jérémie will give a short presentation, which will be followed by an audience question and answer session. We'll be able to take a few questions from guests watching online. So please do use the question and answer function on Zoom if you are watching, and please submit your questions to our moderators at Japan House. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Jérémie. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming and for watching. So I'd like to first thank you to give a big thank to both teams of Windowology exhibition and Japan House for having me tonight and for this wonderful exhibition, which is my point of view, maybe not yours, but I think so. It's quite nice. So I'm pretty happy to be here today, well, in person first, and in live stream as well, in a new hybrid world we are living now. I'm pretty happy as well because, as Simon mentioned, I've been working with Japan House for a few years now, and by other connections, my pictures ended up in this exhibition. So Japan is quite a small world. So today, I'd like to talk about, explain a bit more about the two series which are shown in the exhibitions, and I'll finish the talk with a few other buildings I had the opportunity to photograph in Japan. I'll start with a short introduction about my work and my connection to Japan. So I used to be an engineer and living in Paris in my 20s. And I've been doing more and more photography, and it took a lot of part of my life. And my first travel to Japan in 2005 was quite a trigger for me. First trigger because I kind of fell in love with this country, and I decided I wanted to try to live there for a few years. And also it was a turning point because some of the pictures I took at that time were quite well received and published and exhibited. So I've been thinking about being a professional photographer since that time. So this is one of the pictures I took at that time. This one as well. And as you see, I was already very interested in windows. And so 4 years later, I could make my dream come true and move to Japan in 2009 to become a professional photographer in a new city. So I started to work mainly with media, foreign media, newspapers and magazines. So I had a lot of commissions for portraits, and I had the opportunity to meet very inspiring people. Like on the left picture, you have novelist Kenzaburo Oe. And on the right, you have the artist, well, photographer, designer, architect Hiroshi Sugimoto. And I had a lot of opportunities, of course, to take pictures of culture in general in Japan. So food, architecture, also. Culture is quite amazing, and it's kind of well summarized on this picture, I think. And more various topics as well. So society in general, and the place of women in society as well. So here you have two different examples. On the left, there's a woman wearing a kimono who's about to ride a Shinkansen, a bullet train in Tokyo Station. And on the right side, you have a politician and assistant bowing in front of the audience. And I was there in 2011 during the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami. So after that, I've covered for a few years the aftermath of Fukushima nuclear disaster, and especially how young people live with this disaster in that area. So to talk more about the series we have here in the exhibition, I chose this picture as a starting point because to me it's the image of Tokyo we have, like most of foreigners have in mind. So which means crowded city, very crowded city, a lot of people, noise everywhere, pollution, visual pollution, high buildings. But to me, Tokyo is more like this, so much more mix of much more various in terms of architecture. And here you can go from very, as you can see in the foreground, very small buildings, very small houses, to very high skyscrapers, like in the background. So here is a picture of Shinjuku Station, which is one of the busiest train stations in the world, financial district, and a few dozens of meters away from this district, you have houses and residential areas. So that's what I like in Tokyo. And so I wanted to start a series about these residential areas, which are not well known abroad, in Western countries. And at the same time, I was very interested in contemporary architecture in Japan, which is extraordinary. So I decided to kind of combine those two topics and to start a series called Tokyo no Ye, and to photograph these contemporary houses in Tokyo. So it had to be built after the year 2000, so 21st century houses, and within the Tokyo Metropolis. So this is Tokyo Metropolis. It's about 40 million inhabitants and about 1.5 of the size of Greater London. And so it's about similar density. And if you zoom in a little bit, you can see Shinjuku train station on the right that we saw before. A lot of buildings, right? And at this scale, it gives a good image of what Tokyo looks like. You have main roads with higher buildings, which are here to also to protect from the fires in case of earthquake. And in the middle, you have those small villages made of houses with almost very few cars, very narrow roads, towns everywhere. So it's very similar to villages. And if you zoom in again, if you did some good research, you find the house you were looking for. So in that case, it's a house called Rainy Sunny by architect called Monfuji Architect. And as you can see, it has very interesting windows. But we'll see more about this later. So this is a map. I selected about 200 houses within Tokyo. I decided to shoot about 100, and I selected about 50 for my final series. This is the first house I shot for this series, actually. So it's called it's a house by Atelier. It's called Architecture and Mineral, and I like to compare these houses with like really jewels, which are literally dropped in the city, especially compared to the 99% of very common houses, as you can see nearby. And so the architects are pretty free to do whatever they like, but they don't have total freedom, especially on the volumes and on the aids. And so it's not 100% free. There are some rules. But as for the windows, they can place the windows wherever they like, as long as there's a respect with the neighbors. So this is another amazing shape. It's a house by Architecton called White Base. And this one is by Jun Aoki. It's called I House and Shimokitazawa. So very interesting windows because it preserves the intimacy of the residence, but at the same time it gives a lot of light and view towards the sky, which is great. And I decided to shoot this series all in landscape format to include as much as the neighbors and the other buildings on the shot. So sometimes it was difficult to include the whole house technically, so as you can see, but it was kind of a constraint I wanted to keep. And so the idea was to add the environment as much as I could and everyday life in these areas, and also to show the houses as they are used in everyday life as well. So with beams, cars, curtains, etc. Because the problem with architecture photography is usually commissioned by architects for their own communication. And there's very few magazines who commission photographers to give another view on some buildings. So we usually end up with a lot of very nice pictures or very nice objects. But coming from a documentary background and working a lot for media, I wanted to keep a sense of truth in this series. So this is a house by the same architect, so Fujimoto. So some of you might know the official picture of this house with people everywhere on the balconies, and of course without curtains, so very open between the indoor and the outdoor. So of course the everyday use of the house is a bit different. So it's interesting because of course it's communication. There's a big shift between communication and real life, but well, it's fair enough because it's. I like also the idea that photography can give some dream also for people to give another perspective. It's also interesting because windows with curtains are still windows. It's still more interesting than walls. Maybe not from the outside point of view, but from the inside, it gives a lot of possibilities in terms of lighting. And so maybe the houses in the future will be more or less like this with the improvement of technology. So this one has completely different design, but the idea is pretty much the same, is to preserve the intimacy of the residents, which is quite important in Japan. So here the architect decided to just to include it in his design and use top lights and opening on the side. So it's not, it wouldn't be possible in countries like the UK, but even for Japan, it's still quite surprising for some people. As for example, for this one, I was told by the architect that the owners had to put a barrier at the entrance because some people ended up in their living room thinking it was a kind of secret bar or something. They didn't know what it was. So it could be surprising for everyone. This one is called Delta by Architecton. Like the shape is very futuristic and gives the opportunity to tell that every houses in Japan are detached houses in the sense that there's no rows of terraced houses like in London, mainly for safety, because the gap between the houses allows them to move and to have independent move during earthquake. And also it prevents the propagation of fire because most of the houses are wooden houses. So it gives another possibility for the architect, a lot of creativity, because it's they don't have to do the same house as their neighbor. So this is another house without window, or at least without window facing the street. It's basically blocks of concrete with some top lights by Atelier. And this was designed for a couple of deaf people with 2 children. There's similar windows inside as well, so that they can communicate, the family can communicate between them through the small windows in the flooring inside as well. This is quite a famous house. It's called Moriyama House by Rue Nishizawa from Sana. There's a few blocks like this, and the landlord owns the block in the back, and he lets out a few blocks in the front, mainly to architecture students, I was told, because it's kind of extreme architecture with very thin walls. It's no insulation, so you have to like architecture to live in this kind of apartments. So I was lucky because I went at around 7 AM, and I was lucky to have this lady included in the picture with the funny clothes. And the routine in this series was to spend about an hour in front of each house to try to capture the good moments. And for this one, it was quite far in the suburbs, so I had to just one chance to capture someone, so it had to be the good one. And for this one, on the opposite, I was quite lucky because when I arrived, they were changing the utility pole, so I had to wait a little bit more this time, but it gave me some kind of action shot. And I like to finish this series with Tokyo Noye with the 2 houses by the same architect, with Junichi Sanpei. So this one is called On the Cherry Blossom, because the living room is just facing a cherry tree on the other side of the road. And this house is earthquake proof, by the way, like every others. It doesn't look like, but it can resist. So this is a house called House Tokyo. So it became kind of symbol of my series because it features most of the elements we've seen before. It's very sculptural. It has windows. It doesn't look like to have windows, but it has windows hidden between steel plates. And it's white, so like many of those houses. So I decided to make it as a cover of my book. And so the average lifetime of these houses in Japan is 25 years. So my idea is to continue this project or to start another project in 25 years of time to see how it's evolved. So now I'm going to talk about the other series. Or if you see in the exhibition, it's on the right side of the panel. It comes from a project. From a project called Japan Archipelago of Houses. I made with 3 architects. So yeah, sorry for the cheesy picture, but they're not here, so I wanted to give them some credit. So on the right, you have Manuel Tardis, who has been working and living in Japan for 40 years. He has an architect office called Mikam. And I'm sorry again. And in the center, you have Fabien Mauduit and Véronique Ours, who are architects based in France. I'm sorry, the lady in front is not part of the team, but she's part of the museum where it was exhibited in Japan. So the first house I want to show is a house in Kyoto, and it was designed for a family of 5. The man is working in Tokyo and is commuting to Kyoto to see his family during the weekend. And it's basically a very small house with a gigantic front window. So here's a view from upstairs inside. There's a main room downstairs, which is used as a living room, dining room, bedroom when it's too hot upstairs to sleep during summer. It's used for meetings sometimes, so it's multi-purpose. And it's a wonderful playground for kids. And we always asked the owners about what is the favorite place in the house. And the lady told us it was like here, sitting in the kitchen, facing there's a small garden on the side, so facing the small garden, or watching the moon while she does the dishes at night. So there's always a relationship with nature which is strong, even with contemporary houses. And this is a space upstairs, so where they sleep, so with futons, so a very traditional way of living in a very contemporary house. Sorry. So I'm going to show you a short movie to give you another sense of the scale of the space. So in a place called Asaikawa, which is the coldest place in Japan. And when we arrived at the airport, it was like minus 15 degrees. So we were welcomed by penguins. So there we went to see a house called Repository by a local architect called Jun Igarashi. He's doing a lot of projects in Hokkaido, but he's quite famous all around Japan now with his unique designs. So it's a house for a family of 4. It's in the middle of the fields, and it looks to be quite dark with these small windows, but it's like actually quite bright inside, thanks to there's a big top light in the middle of the room of the house, and also larger windows facing the fields. And it's basically an open space, a big open space, quite large for Japan, about 300 square meters, with 2 main rooms, one for living, dining, and the other one for sleeping and hobbies, and with small spaces around those 2 main rooms. So this is a view from the other side. And there are curtains, so there's a bathroom is just in the middle, and there are curtains they can close in winter, and they usually open them in summertime to leave the airflow. And just 2 interesting elements in the Mr. Igarashi's design is that it's an open space but with some boundaries, and I think we'll see more and more of design like this in the future. So here's a video. This one. Tokyo, it's a house by an architect called Go Hasegawa. I like it because it looks like a shed from the outside, but it's actually very, very modern. And it's another good example of the use of top lights. So from the ceiling, from the roof to the ground floor, through the flooring. And so it's a household with a couple and their daughter. And the request to the architect was to build a house with a lot of natural light and traditional materials. And here is the video for this one.
みんなにおすすめになってる。そうでもない。あ、本当。あ、じゃあそこで聞いたの。
あ、そうそうそう。したらなんか10月の大体10日前後で、さっき確認したら12日の料理なんだけど。
あ、来月なの。
あ、そうそう。あ、全然いいよ、一緒に行こうよ。
We moved to Hayama, which is near Kamakura, about an hour drive from Tokyo. It's a pretty good name for our exhibition because it's called the Window House. And it's a weekend house for the CEO of a fishing company who likes to stare at the sea and to be alone, but sometimes away from his family. So it's basically a very, very small, it's almost a cabin. It's a very small wooden structure with four concrete legs. And the design is based on the fact that they didn't want to obstruct the view to the residents on the other side of the street. So they decided to build those two large windows. So I'm going to show you another video for this one, just full disclosure. It's not for this one, it's not the real resident. It's a member of the staff of the architect, because it was just built, just brand new, so the owner hadn't moved in yet. Okay, then we move back to Tokyo. This house was actually designed by my colleague for this project, Manuel Tardis. He didn't push to have it included in the exhibition and in the book, but as the other two architects and I decided it was quite interesting. It was really worth to have it as well. So it's in Setagaya Ward. It's in very residential area. You can see there's a tatami maker just in front. It looks like countryside. And the windows are not as spectacular as ones you saw before, but it's quite interesting. First, because the house is kind of cut at each corner to have 4 small gardens. So it refers to ancestral technique, which is called shakkei, which means that you kind of borrow part of the landscape in your design. So seen from the inside, and from the outside, the intimacy is also very well protected with the trees. And the windows are also quite useful because they decided to build the house without air conditioning. So they use it to create an airflow during summertime, which is quite hot in Japan, in Tokyo. And there's no insulation and there's no heating system as well, except the floor, as you can see in the kitchen. So they decided to live with nature, which looks like it's quite possible. And there's only one door in the house. It's an open space, as most of the houses you saw before. There's only one door for the bathroom. And here is a movie. His wife, so who's on the video, who's called Kiwako Kamo. Sorry. Okay, I'm just again. Sorry about that. So now we move. We're still in Tokyo. It's a house by Kengo Kuma, who is one of the most famous architects in Japan. He designed the V&A in Dundee, for those who don't know him. and it's called a Steel House. So it was designed for a couple in the 60s. The husband is a teacher at university and is also a big fan of trains, as you can see. So he wanted a space where he could exhibit his collection. And the wife is a tea ceremony teacher and master, as you will see in the video. So both of them have their own space, which are very different. And it's another example that tradition can cohabitate with contemporary architecture, which is not rare in Japan. As you see, when you work about houses, that's what I thought was interesting, is that you learn about architecture as much as about culture in general and society in general. So that's very interesting. So just a couple of more pictures about project in this series. This one is by Daisuke Sugawara, just to show that the windows is disappear in the wall. So it blurs the line between the outdoor and the indoor, which is interesting. And this one is in Tokyo, and it has an amazing window facing a park in Western Tokyo, designed by Shigeru Ban. So after these two series, I started to work with architects, so receiving some commission for their projects. So it's more commercial work, it's more corporate, definitely, but I still try to keep humans in the center of the stage. So this is a house by Atelier with a V-shaped window, and the house in the middle in its environment. So it's in central Tokyo, near Ebisu Station. And this was a nice small project by two architects called Koma. So it's a shop and cafe and shop in the first and second floor, and ground and first floor. and a small apartment for the owner on the second floor. And it looks a bit like a tree house. So because the windows in the lower levels kind of make the structure kind of disappear. So it's emphasize the small box on the top. And this tree house is actually in the middle of a big concrete forest. So again, you go from very, very small to very, very high. This is a house again, but turned into an art gallery by an architect called Rémi. So it changed the windows facing the street, and he created large openings in the back to have this view over the green wall of the neighbor buildings. So it's another time it's the same technique of Shakei, bringing the nature into his own design. And he used this old shoji, which is a kind of a door to hide the window, which is painted into white, so it's quite modern, and it makes us think there's still a window, but there's not anymore. And now we fly to Naoshima with a project by an architect called Sambuichi. It's a city hall, not a community hall, and a sports center. So it's again a good example of use of natural elements, so natural light with top lights, and also use of the wind, because the shape of the roof is designed to increase the airflow in the building during summertime. And I will finish with the last project I shot for a book about metabolism, which is an architecture movement from the 70s in Japan. So not contemporary, but modern, and still very very unique. And it's quite an iconic window, I think. It's a building by Kisho Kurokawa, and it's called Nakagin Capsule Tower. And it has like 140 capsules like this were supposed to be replaced every 20 years, which has not been done. So now it's quite bad shape, and it will, I think it will be demolished in the coming months. So it's a good conclusion to say that architecture in Japan is very ephemeral. So you have to enjoy it while it's here. Thank you for watching.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jérémie. Wonderful, fascinating presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have some time for questions. So if you'd like to ask a question here in the hall, please do put your hand up, and somebody will come along with a microphone so that you can be heard by our viewers online as well. And of course, if you are online, please do submit your questions. If I may start with one from myself, if I may, just on your last comment about the fleeting nature of these examples of architecture in Tokyo. You mentioned 25 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's an average. Yeah, but well, it actually comes from quite far away in history, because it comes mainly from Shinto beliefs. Shinto, which is one of the main religions in Japan. There's a very famous shrine in Ise, which is rebuilt every 20 years. It's made of wood. So they have this in their culture as well. And there's several factors also, because the regulations in terms of earthquake evolve a lot. So buildings always have to be quite new to be earthquake proof. And for the houses, as you can see, there's very few space for garden now. So, and the reason is that every 25 years for every generation, they have to pay for very high inheritance tax, which leads them to sell usually half of the land, which creates the fact that houses are smaller and smaller every generation. So there's no more space for garden anymore. So just small space for a car usually. So yeah, a combination of factors which make architecture quite ephemeral.
Oh, interesting. You mentioned that the inheritance taxes, there are intergenerational mortgages as well, aren't there, with
right.
houses in Japan? So
yeah, that's right.
Maybe it gives more flexibility. Thank you. Thank you very much. We have something from online, but if you do have a question here, please do put your hand up. I'll go online first. This is, was it challenging to shoot inside houses? Did people open their doors easily?
We went through for the Archipelago of the House project, we went through the architects actually. So we introduced us to some of the owners. They knew they would agree to do that. But some of the architects didn't find any owners who allow us. So yeah, it was kind of challenging, but as long as you know someone who knows someone, it could work.
Thank you. Do we have somebody maybe here? Yes, we have in the white. If you keep your hand up so that we can give you the microphone. Thank you very much. You can take the microphone, yes. Thank you.
What do you think about your role as a photographer, especially because so much of your work involves like entering into people's lives? And like, what's your relationship with the people like in the houses that you photograph?
So just here's the first part of the question, my role as a photographer.
Yeah, like what's your role as a photographer? Especially, I'm asking this especially because so much of your work involves entering into people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, how do you feel about that?
Well, I feel that my role is to document as much life as much as I can, as a historical point of view as well. I feel maybe it's interesting for us now to talk about these houses, but maybe in a few dozens of years, it's going to turn even more interesting. So it's important to document this kind of moments. And as I said, it's very rare to, even sometimes it's quite paused, as you saw in the movies, and it's quite rare to be able to enter people's houses in Japan. So it's quite important to have been able to do it. But at my own scale as well.
Thank you very much for the question. Shall we go to the gentleman here on the end? Thank you.
So you had a fair few houses that you chose from. Was this a typical representation of those sort of contemporary homes? Because it seems like it could be seen over sort of all Western capitals. It looks very similar. And I've been to Japan, and on the surface things look familiar, but when you dig a bit closer, deeply, you find that it's totally different and very startling. So, superficially it looks very modern, but you see the details inside the property that reflects the sort of Japanese culture. Is that typical for your selection?
Well, for the first series, the Tokyo Noye series, my selection was mostly about the shapes, unfortunately, which is maybe not very representative of contemporary houses, because it doesn't mean it's better than the others. It just stand up in the middle of very normal houses. Like I said, 99% of the houses are just very common. So it was, as a photographer, it was interesting for me to choose these very interesting shapes. Also, houses that we couldn't see in Western countries, like the houses without windows, with a total relationship with the environment. So that's how I chose them. And for the second series, as I said, we mainly chose the architect, and after that led us to some of their clients who wanted to be photographed. So we had the opportunity sometimes to choose one house or another one, but we chose mainly the architect.
So it's just the artistic design competition.
Yeah, and after that you start from here, and after that I think I kind of try to include as much as Japanese culture, as long as you're inside. As you can see how people live, still in a very traditional way. You can see what they like, what their replies to what's the favorite place in the house also was interesting. So you start from a design, from an idea, from art, and you end up with something larger, maybe about society, which was interesting for me.
Thank you, thank you. Maybe we have, yes, please. If you could keep your hand up so we can see. Thank you very much. And if you could keep your microphone close to your mouth as well so that the people online can hear as well. Thank you.
As everyone here probably knows, that Japan is an island nation, and there's also an extremely large population with a density that is a bit unimaginable compared to certain Western countries. But occasionally in Japan, you can find these public buildings and houses that are almost ridiculously narrow or seemingly like a wedge. And these buildings, I guess, are also in terms of the photos of the houses that you have shown of photographical interest. Is there a reason why you didn't, or have you included any of these buildings that are seemingly badly designed, but interesting enough for the project, it seems?
We have I have many small, very small houses. Even if it doesn't look like it's very small, but most of the houses in Tokyo are very, very small. And we had in the exhibition, maybe you saw, there's one very, very narrow house that I didn't show today, but there's a couple of examples which are quite extreme, and people. It seems very extreme for us, but it looks like people can adapt, and even with extreme designs, that the owners look like they were happy with that.
Thank you very much. And maybe we'll take two more questions, one from the hall and one from online. So maybe this gentleman here, if you could. Thank you.
Thank you for your talk. It was really interesting. Just kind of two questions, really. You said you lived in Japan for 9 years. I'm just wondering what changes you might have seen in that time in relation to house design, but also what changes you might have seen kind of regionally, because I saw that you traveled to different parts of Japan. So I'm just wondering whether there were any significant differences region to region as well.
So the first difference between when I started this project and then when I see now is that I think there are less and less houses in these residential areas because of the size. It could not be smaller, so it turns to become like small buildings, like with apartments actually. So still small scale, but I think that's the trend. That's the new trend. And in terms of difference between regions, it's mainly the size as well, because the design can be very similar. Like you can be in the middle of nowhere, and in the middle of a town, and have no window facing the street as well, which is quite surprising. You can understand in Tokyo, but even in small towns, you couldn't find the same design. So, but the difference is the size of the house.
Okay, thank you very much. And we'll have one more question from online. It's quite simple because a very fascinating presentation. Thank you. With so many different windows. I'm curious, what would your next project be? Are you still concentrating on windows, or would you consider also exploring other architectural components?
So now I've been based in London for 4 years. So I'm kind of back to European architecture. So I'm working on a project in the city of London, but more concentrating about old buildings, old stones. So I think maybe because I'm getting aged, so I'm thinking about old stuff now. yeah, coming back to Europe, I really consider things and architecture. Also, I've been living in Japan, so I missed these old buildings as well. So now and London is especially very interesting because it's a good mix, very good mix between contemporary and old buildings. So it's a new project.
Thank you very much. We look forward to your next photographs. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jérémie, for your wonderful presentation. Please join me in thanking Jérémie. You can see his work in the exhibition, but thank you to everybody here in the hall, and also thank you to everybody online who has joined us. Everybody will receive a simple feedback form by email as a result of registering for this event. If you do fill that in, that will help us be able to put on more events like this in the future. We do have the exhibition of Windowology, new architectural views from Japan, which is in the gallery and is open and a little bit later tonight. So please do feel free to go and have a look. We also, in conjunction with the exhibition, we're looking, you'll see if you go inside, there is a connection with tea, and we have tea demonstrations weekly. We call it Chado, by the Urasenke Foundation here in London, presented by the Tanko Kai UK. And that's until the 6th of April, not to be missed. And that's also free of charge. And we have another online event, especially from Japan, Hashirama Sochi. This is the richness of space in Japanese architecture, a talk by Nakatani Norihito from Waseda University. And you can also see some of his research work in the exhibition. Thank you once again. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.